Hello, so my name is Professor Bill Buchanan, and I lead a podcast series in World Leaders in Cryptography. And I'm so happy to have Ivan Damgård with me here. Hi, Ivan.
I
So Ivan is a professor in the Department of Computer Science at Aarhus University in Denmark. He is the co-inventor of the Merkle-Damgard construction, and which is used in MD5, SHA-1 and SHA-2. In 2020, he received the Test of Time Award for a paper entitled A Generalization, a Simplification, and Some Applications of Paillier's Probabilistic Public Key System. And in 2021, he received an ACM award for the test of time for a paper entitled Multiparty, Unconditional Secure Protocols. In 2010, he was elected as a Fellow of the International Association of Cryptologic Research. Ivan has also co-founded two cryptography-focused companies, Cryptomathic and Partisia. So, Ivan, what's your current role and what does a typical day involve for you?
well, I'm a professor at the university in Aarhus, as you said. So, typically I go to work, do some writing, perhaps with papers in process, talk to various people on ongoing projects, go do teaching if that's decent. Um, and yeah, we have regular group meetings in the research group that I'm the head of, and seminars and so on. So it's a mixture of all those things typically.
Yeah, that's great. And so, what if we go right back to your school days? What were you like at school? What were your favorite subjects? What really stimulated you in your early years?
Well, I guess it was mostly the science thing, so mathematics and physics, and it was yeah, maybe not. It's hard to remember what was the most fascinating, but certainly it was the things that came the easiest to me at the time, those subjects.
Yeah, and music plays a big part of your life. I think you did a minor in your degree as part
I
of
did.
that, and was music a big thing when you were growing up?
It was. I started playing violin when I was,
Mm.
I guess, 7 or 8. Um,
Wow.
and since I took up playing guitar, I played the mandolin a little bit, mostly folk music. I've been doing this, yeah, ever since I can remember. And sort of through my studies and onwards, I was doing this sort of on the side, on this, let's say, semi-professional basis. So it's always been a big part of what I'm doing.
Yeah. And is there a difference? I know that we have Scottish folk music and Irish and even the US. And is there a difference in Denmark
There is
with
a difference.
folk
So we have a
music?
big, so in the Nordic countries, also in Denmark, we have a big tradition for dancing music.
Mm.
So almost all the traditional music we have is either old folk songs, ballads, or it's music for dancing. So we do have the same dances, I guess, types that you also have in Scotland, waltzes, polkas and stuff. They do sound different, but the dance is actually the same.
That's great. I think there was a lot has been borrowed between Scotland and Denmark. There's a kind of shared culture there. We've borrowed many of your words, I think.
Well, I think the Vikings were responsible for that. Uh,
Yeah, that's good. And what sparked your interest in maths cryptography?
so basically, it's sometimes people ask you these questions, sort of how did your career start and how did you plan to get to where you're at? But I think the truth is that a lot of chance and just being in the right place at the right time plays the bigger role, in fact. So when I was to choose university studies, it was not that I had any plan. To be completely honest, I chose math and computer science because that was, what I thought was the easiest thing, in fact. Uh, and so it turned out well, of course, but I can't say I had a big plan at the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so you've worked in so many areas, hashing methods, of course. homomorphic encryption, threshold signatures, oblivious transfer, multi-party computation. Many researchers will stick to one topic and follow that through. And it's really interesting to see that you've generally migrated through many of the areas of cryptography. But what would you say was the most interesting area of all those?
Oh, that is a hard one. I mean, it's always been. I guess you're right. Some people, dig one hole and dig very deep, and become absolute world champions in exactly that thing. It's never been who I am. I guess I've always been the kind of person who knows a little bit about lots of things. But yeah. So of course, I mean, multi-party computation that followed me through the years. It always came back. Uh, so I have to point to that first, I guess. Um, but then, of course, I mean, all the stuff about hashing and so on is also something that I remember well.
Yeah. And obviously, we're now moving into a world that is starting to see multi-party computation happening, Shamir shares, distributed signatures, the opportunity to really split tasks up. So could you give us a quick history of multi-party computation?
Yeah. So for me, it started way back when I was a PhD student in 87, 88.
Mhm.
I was in Amsterdam visiting there.
Mhm.
And I met a guy called Jeroen van der Graaf, who was
Mhm.
Dutch and was also he was also a PhD student at the time. Um, and we had heard about zero knowledge, which was a known concept at the time. Um, and you can kind of think of zero knowledge, if you look at it, one way to look at it is to say it's like a secure computation where only one party has input. Like you're trying to verify via some test that the secret I claims no is actually the correct thing. But it's a secure computation, so the only output is whether my secret satisfies the conditions or not, right? So we started thinking maybe you could do something where several parties had inputs and then do something similar. So of course, I mean, we were PhD students. We didn't know much about the broad field or had much contact. So we didn't really know that anybody else was looking at this at the same time. Of course, there were people doing that, but that's why we started. So we came up with our first protocol that then wasn't actually the first multi-party protocol because we were beaten by half a year by some other guys. But then yeah, we went on to do with other people eh, this paper that you mentioned, the Tessa Time Award for the first unconditionally secure construction. Um, so that was where but that was where secret sharing came in, which of course was known for some years at the time by Shamir and Blakely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so I don't know if we should sort of go on forward in time here or
Yeah, just to go, we can wind the clock back and take it forward as to what
yeah, so,
happened when.
okay. Sure. So yeah, then there was after all these years where sort of the first feasibility results were shown, like showing how many corrupted players can you tolerate among the participants and so on. All these basic things were shown. It was a little bit quiet on the NPC front for some years, I would say. Um, but then, and of course, the general feeling at the time was, of course, even though this was obviously a very powerful tool to be able to do any computation securely, it was mainly theory. I think everybody thought of this as being just a theoretical tool, beautiful, but useless in practice. Um, but then around, I guess, 2004, five, like this, something like that. Some people had the guts to actually go and implement some of this stuff. Um, so there was a system called Fair Play that these guys built, um, um, and it was the first time anybody actually had the courage to go and code this up. And it was a very simple thing that was shown at some Eurocrypt conference, a demo that they showed, where it was just solving the so-called billionaires problem, where you have two people have each an integer, and you want to find which one has the bigger integer. That was the only thing that they did. But I think even just the idea to see this work in real life sort of sparked interest and inspired many people. So I guess just this idea that maybe this could be used then started a whole wave of new results where, efficiency got improved by many orders of magnitude. It was quite amazing to see, actually. And then in 2007-8, I guess, we did the first in Aarhus in Denmark, the first industrial application of multi-party computation. We built this electronic marketplace, you could say, an auction house, electronic auction house, where farmers could trade production contracts. Like if you're a farmer, you can have a contract with the EU. It gives you a right to produce a certain amount of crop with support from the EU. And these things can be traded. They can be bought and sold. So we did this kind of an auction where you could go to the marketplace and sell your stuff or buy stuff. And this was the first time this actually happened, sort of for real. That was quite a turning point, I think, for many people, including ourselves, of course. So based on that, we started Partisia, which has sort of been trying to market MPC solutions in various ways over the years and have grown quite big these days.
Yeah, that's great. Because I know there's a lot of work that's been happening on distributed key generation around Peterson, Shears, and Feldman. And obviously the problem that you have is when you have a dishonest dealer of the shares, and whether you can make it completely distributed. I don't think we're quite there yet with that, but that's obviously a major problem.
Well, I think the so the problem of so-called verifiable secret sharing is solved. I think if you're talking about discrete log-based systems, let's say, I think there's definitely solutions that are perfectly fine. In practice, doing secure innovation of RSA moduli is a much more complicated task, of course, and that's still quite slow. But I think anything based on discrete log these days can be done pretty much on the fly. So that's this whole area of threshold cryptography. That's kind of the a branch of MPC, if you like. A distribute a decryption service or a signature service, and that's grown immensely in applications these days. I guess partly because of blockchain industry, but also other things. But people sort of realize that putting all your eggs in one basket is really not a good idea these days.
Yeah, that's good. So in 1989, you published a paper, a design principle for hash functions, and which, as I said, it was used for MD5, SHA-1 and SHA-2. Could you just explain? I know it was a long time ago that you published the paper, but it was such a classic paper, and it's built such a foundation in hashing methods. So can you just explain roughly how it works?
Yeah, so it's kind of fun because the way I started thinking about this was actually that there was at the time there was a new paper by Silvio Micali and Manuel Blom that came out, which showed a result saying if you have a pseudo-random generator, this thing that takes a random CS input, outputs a random looking longer string. So they showed that if you can expand the seed by just one bit, and the output looks random, then you can expand it any amount you want, in principle. So I started thinking, I had published something about hash functions already at the time. So it kind of, I guess, it sparked the thought, maybe you could do something for hash function in the opposite direction. Like if you can compress an input by a certain amount, its fixed size, can you then expand the input domain? So you can take any size of input and still output something of fixed size. So now you compress by much more, but it's still hard to find collisions. And that was kind of the idea. So I mean, the construction, of course, is pretty simple. So I have a fixed size input that, and the output is short. So I have a function that does this. And the assumption is it's hard to find collisions for this thing. You can't find two inputs. You can't feasibly find two inputs that map to the same output. And then what you do, skating over some details, what you do is that you split up your input in fixed size blocks. And then you basically start by a string which has size. So if you add one input block, together you have the input size for your fixed size function. Then you apply the function, you get something shorter, you place the next input block next to it, you apply it again, and it will go on like this. and modulo some technicalities that one has to do to make the proof go through. When you've eaten the entire input, the output that your fixed size function delivers at the end of the day is actually your hash output. So it wasn't that at the time that I mean this idea kind of was out there in various forms already, but I guess my contribution was actually proving that it actually works, this thing, and making sure all the technicalities were handled. So then it turned out that Ralph Merkle had done something very similar some years before. I didn't know about this at the time. It wasn't ever published. It was in his PhD thesis, but it was not published, so nobody knew about this. But then Gilles, who was, I think, program chair that year at Crypto, happened to know about this. So then sort of everybody got the credit that they deserved, and the thing got its name that probably named after the inventors. Yes,
that's amazing. I mean, Ralph obviously created so many novel methods. The Merkle tree was obviously one, and it was strange that he did his PhD and then he kind of moved his field. I don't think he worked in cryptography that much. Did you ever meet Ralph?
I did. He was in fact at the conference, at the crypto conference that year when my paper was published. So I did talk to him.
Yeah. We had and it can be traced back. I think public key encryption can be traced back to some of the essays that he did when he was an undergraduate. And
that was one of the very first ideas, these Merkle puzzles that was sort of, I guess, not the actual idea that that came out in new directions, but something that gives I guess a quadratic advantage to the honest guys over the adversary, but of course not something that one would want to rely on in practice, I guess. But there were some ideas that I think inspired many people.
Yeah, and for the Damgård Jurek method, you merged Shamir shares with homomorphic encryption. What was the problem that you were addressing with that, and how can this be used in privacy-aware systems?
Well, so the first of all, so Paillier published his crypto system, which is basically an additively homomorphic encryption scheme, where you do computations modulo n squared, where n is in our same modulus, and you get a crypto system where the plaintext space is numbers modulo n, basically. And what happens is that if you have two encryptions, you can multiply them modulo n squared, and the result becomes a new ciphertext that contains the sum of what the old ciphertext contained. The issue with this, one issue with this, is that a ciphertext is basically twice as large as the plaintext, and also you cannot have bigger numbers as plaintext than you have room for inside n, so to speak. So what we noticed was that me and my student Mass at the time, we noticed that if you just do basically the same thing but modulo higher powers of n, you get a new system that works basically the same way, but where the plaintext space now, so if you have numbers modulo n to the s, let's say for some s that's bigger than 2, then you work modulo n to the s plus 1, but your plaintext space is numbers modulo n to the s. So in that way, if for bigger s, the sort of expansion ratio, the plaintext or ciphertext size ratio becomes closer and closer to 1. That was one thing. And it turns out that, much to our surprise, actually, many years later, some people, I think Nico Dötling and other friends, some of his friends, published some results on what is known as obfuscation, so IO obfuscation, which is this very advanced tool where you can sort of make an obfuscated program that acts more or less like a black box. And they used our crypto system in their construction, because it turns out to be the only crypto system that's additively homomorphic and has a particular property that they needed. We had no idea that this was going to be useful at a later point, but it was quite a surprise So it's because I think the idea was that even if the ciphertext is very long, use a high power of n, you can get a hint that's short, which still lets you decrypt the whole thing. And that was the thing that they was exactly what they needed for their construction.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a fun story, that sometimes, things that you have no idea is useful turns out to be useful in different ways than you imagined.
Yeah, I think that's quite difficult. That's quite uh, that's a theme that goes through a lot of your research, is that you became the starting point of a whole lot of research, and that you just didn't stick with one thing. You generally addressed some core problems. So one of the methods that you created was the Damgård Fujisak method, which I think was published in a statistically hiding integer commitment scheme based on groups and hidden order. And I think you defined a method that allowed a prover to show that they had a positive value. Can you just outline the basic method and how it can be used in practice?
So to be fair, the idea actually comes from an earlier paper by Fujisaka and Okamoto.
Mm.
So they were the ones that introduced this idea that you can have a short commitment to an integer value. And the integer can in principle be arbitrarily large, even though the size of the commitment is fixed. What we did, me and Fujisaki, what we did was that we gave the first proof that the protocols that you need for this commitment scheme actually work. There was some bugs in earlier work that we fixed, but that was basically the main result there. So the idea is that when you commit to an integer, to use this for anything useful, you want to be able to show that, I have committed, for instance, I have committed to three numbers A, B, and C, and A times B is C. This is the main tool that you need. And the protocol for this that were there at the time turned out to not quite work. But we were able to change it a bit and prove that change protocol did work.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you worked with the mighty David Chaum on the paper Multiparty, Unconditionally Secure Protocols. What was your memory of working with David, and how has this work been used in practice?
Well, so of course, the paper you mentioned was this first paper where we used secret sharing as a tool for multi-party computation. That of course is something that's been done, gazillions of times later on in all kinds of different ways. So David was the head of the cryptography group at CWI at the time, and was doing all kinds of different work, but mainly stuff in zero knowledge, zero computation, and things like this. But of course, also in his sort of main, theme of research, this idea of anonymous communication, and so on. So David is quite a fascinating personality. He's probably the guy I've met with the fastest intuition. He would sometimes say that doesn't work, and we ask him why. I don't know, it doesn't work. And then sure enough, when you look more closely, it didn't work. So that was fun to work with. Yeah, and then it's fair to say that this whole idea of using secret sharing for multi-party computation is sort of come full circle. Like we now understand pretty much what the best possible solutions are with this approach, at least in terms of how much communication you need to do it. We have new results now that say that if you have n participants and you're trying to compute some arithmetic circuit securely, then you have to have an overhead factor of in communication of n, the number of players. So a factor n over the stupid protocol where you just send all the inputs to one guy, he does the computation and sends you back the results, right? So that's kind of, when you have protocols that match this lower bound. So that's kind of at least in terms of communication size, we kind of fully understand what goes on there these days.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you worked in areas of multi-party computation and threshold methods. What do you think the current research gaps are in those fields?
Well, so the big gap, of course, which unfortunately might not be closed anytime soon, is if we go back to these unconditionally secure protocols based on secret sharing. What we know is that if you want to be efficient, that means polynomial time in the size of the computation, then we need many rounds. So basically, if you're computing some circuit securely, you basically need a round of communication. You have to send messages for every layer of that circuit. Every time you pass one layer of multiplication gates, you need to communicate. And we don't know whether that's inherent or not. So is it possible to have efficient, unconditionally secure computation where the number of rounds is constant? And that's, if you want a fast headache, be my guest, try and solve this one. But it's probably hard because it's known that if we solve this, it would imply some pretty big breakthroughs in other areas as well. There's something called locally decodable codes that would all of a sudden change shape that field also if we could solve this. So that's a really hard one, but it's of course an irritating gap in our knowledge. It's probably one of the biggest gaps left in MPC these days.
And you worked with the Paillier homomorphic encryption method in some of your work, but now we see lattice cryptography really taking off in that and for homomorphic encryption. Do you think there's still a place for the Paillier method?
So I think there is, of course, if somebody builds a big quantum computer, of course the answer is no. But I mean, nobody knows whether that happens or even if it happens at all. But if modulo that, I think there is. We do have results on things like what is these days known as silent pre-processing. So where the idea is that, okay, so to begin from the beginning, we know some ways in which if you have a bunch of players that want to do a secure computation, if you supply them with some correlated randomness, so we each get some random variable, some random stuff, but it's correlated in a very particular, carefully chosen way. So it's coordinated choice. If we have this as a resource, we can do MPC much faster than if we had to start from scratch. But then, of course, we have to work hard to produce this stuff in some pre-processing phase, let's say. But then some really smart people, including my colleague Peter Scholl, have thought of ways in which you can, let's say, distribute short seeds. So small stuff that doesn't take much to produce, but these seeds are correlated. And then you can expand these locally to this big pre-processing material I was talking about before. So it's a way to save a lot of communication. And it turns out that this sort of construction, the so-called pseudo-random correlated generators, can be produced, some of it can be produced based on Paillier encryption, tools from there, in a way that requires less communication than what we know how to do using LVE. So there are some smart things about the group structure there and stuff that lets you do things more easily, in fact, than you can with learning with errors, let's say.
Yeah, it's great. And obviously Ethereum and Bitcoin have selected ECDSA, and it perhaps isn't the best signature method for splitting the signature up. So do you think there'll ever be a way that we could distribute ECDSA?
I mean, there are solutions. This situation is not that bad, but I mean, I agree that ECDSA is a little bit a strange construction, and as I understand, at least, it comes historically from the fact that when this thing was designed, Schnorr still had a patent on Schnorr signatures. And they didn't want to people have to pay for that. So therefore, when they did something else that was sort of a little bit strange construction, just to make sure that it was different enough from Schnorr's method to avoid the patent. At least that's the story I heard. So that's probably the reason why it is a little bit. I don't know. It works. It probably is secure, but there's no security proof. and it's a little bit weird in some ways. So of course, I think it would have been many things would have been easier if they had just chosen SHA to begin with. But of course, the historic reasons for not doing that.
That's right. And you've worked in areas of DNA screening. Can you outline the types of methods that you applied for this?
Yeah, so that's an interesting project. It came out because there were some biologists in the US working at MIT who got increasingly worried about the fact that DNA engineering is developing really, really fast, and one can see on the horizon that at some point it might be possible for someone to engineer a dangerous virus. That one then would be able to use as a weapon or for terrorists, let's say, and that's a really scary scenario. So one wants to control. So the companies that have the equipment to do DNA synthesis would like to make sure that what they're asked to produce is not something dangerous. But on the other hand, of course, lots of the big companies that do DNA research for perfectly good reasons want to protect their trade secrets. So it's not like you want to, let's say in theory, you could have a central register that contains dangerous DNA strings that we know about. But then the idea of sending all the DNA synthesis orders from companies all over the world to this place and have them check whether this is dangerous doesn't sound like, an option that the companies would like much. So you want to protect their privacy and at the same time make sure that you screen correctly. So these biologists, one had this idea and had a good idea for how you could do the screening more effectively than before. That was a pure biology result. And then we came up with some methods from cryptography to implement this with the privacy preserving property in mind. It's basically, cutting a long story short, the idea is that you take your dangerous DNA, you split the thing up in windows, so smaller strings, that kind of contain the characteristic features that make this thing be dangerous. And then you make some variants to account for mutants. And then what you do is you take your input string, you want to test is this thing dangerous? You split this thing up in windows. And you then test whether one of these windows is equal to one of these variants that you have in your register. And then the idea kind of is that what you do, instead of comparing these things in the clear to protect privacy, you hash them first, and then you compare, and then you make sure that it's not feasible. So the hash function is actually not an ordinary hash function, but it's a keyed hash function that you can't compute unless you talk to some servers. So you can't, as an adversary, do, let's say, a brute force attack, because you'll only be able to compute the hash function with the help of these servers. This will constrain you in how fast you can do this. So that's kind of, I'm skipping a lot of details here, but that's sort of the basic idea.
Yeah, I think these days you see also homomorphic encryption applied into these areas, and I think it's even applied into machine learning for DNA.
We could have done that, but it would have been way too slow. Yeah. The problem is that the data sizes here are really enormous. Traffic, the number of questions one would have to answer in such a system is going to be really, really big. So the main thing was to do something that would be efficient enough, and even just having to do one big experimentation for every question the system has to answer is going to be just too expensive.
Yeah. And it's great, as an academic, you were the co-founder of two spin-out companies. One was Cryptomathic. Can you actually define what the initial focus of the company was and what its current products and services are?
Yeah, so when we started the thing, this was together with my advisor back then, Peter Landrock, and my colleague Johan Brandt. And we came out of mathematics at the time. My master project was in fact in representation theory of finite groups, pure math, no cryptography there. But so we came from math, and so we wanted to emphasize that we were doing stuff in cryptography, but with a mathematical background. So that's why we call it cryptomathic, with the math inside the name. Um, so what we did initially was basically just to, be the people who understood the math behind things like RSA and stuff like this, because back then this wasn't something everybody knew about. Um, it's hard to imagine these days, I guess, but back then we would get calls from banks saying something like along the lines of we bought a hardware unit. It does something called RSA. What is that? And so we kind of made a small living from being able to answer questions like that and be able to write code that could do these things. Um, but of course, then I mean, time flies, and it turns out that if you want to do business, people don't really want to buy just the engine; they want to buy the entire car. So the company has developed now into being, I think, big in the finance sector, doing chip card solutions, personalization of devices, stuff like this. I'm not involved in the company anymore, but I think that's still a line of business.
Yeah. And what time was that?
Oh,
What was
this
the
was back in,
dates?
I think, 86, something like that.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
maybe, sure.
And then you did it again with Partisia. So what was
Right.
the focus for them, and
Yeah. So,
what
so,
are they currently doing?
so as I said, Partisia was founded based on this first industrial application of MPC.
Uh,
So the farmers organization that used this in the first place wanted to do the auction once every year, because I mean, as a farmer, you're naturally on a 1 year cycle. So to be able to do this, we formed the company. So there was someone who could run this. Because at first it was just a research project, but of course that ends once the funding is over. So we did that, and then I guess for some years nothing really moved much because I guess we were a little bit too soon, uh, too early for the market to understand what NPC is about. But then I guess the big change came with the blockchain industry, because for one thing, um, very fast, zero knowledge became a big thing in the blockchain sector. Um, and I would never have thought that we would come to a place where somebody in some industrial sector would say everybody knows about zero knowledge. What about NPC? So so then what Patricia realized was that in some ways blockchain is a perfect tool for doing NPC in practice, because it's all well and fine to have the academic protocol, the theoretical construction. But when you're doing it in real life, you need coordination. Like when several people want to do the same protocol, one need to be sure, uh, are we ready to go? Do we have the inputs we need? If we need to get paid before we do it, did we actually all receive the stuff we need to get? If something goes wrong, what do we do? Someone crashes. What do we do? Do we go back to the beginning? Can we continue from here? All this kind of stuff is what blockchain is kind of exactly the tool for. Um, and so because Partisia went into this and did his own blockchain project, this brought in lots of funds, investments, and so on. So the company has grown a lot, and has about, I'm not even entirely sure, of 60 people maybe these days,
wow.
uh,
Excellent.
that do MPC, but also do blockchain stuff and any kind of mixture of these things.
And that's excellent. Well done for that. And what would you say was your favorite paper that you ever wrote, and why?
That's a hard one. Uh, and I might even not be fair here because I might not be able to remember everything, of course. But I mean, obviously, the things that sort of um, came back and were awarded with Test of Time awards is, of course, things that are dear to your heart, like the first MPC paper, and the first hash function paper, and so on. But it will be really hard to select one.
Yeah.
I don't think I can
Yeah.
do.
And what was a typical time between you writing a paper and it being published and then people really picking up? If you look at elliptic curve cryptography, if you talk to Neil Kobolitz, his paper really didn't take off until Satoshi Nakamoto picked up
Mhm.
elliptic curve cryptography. And perhaps that's what the test of time papers are, awards are identifying, that,
Mhm.
that your work wasn't picked up. Would that generally the case for some of your big impact papers that took a while?
I think back then, yes, certainly, because and that's natural, I think, because
Mm.
like the first MPC papers were definitely theoretical things, um, and there would be no practical impact until much later.
Yeah,
Um, so the fact that the academic idea has impact is typically something you don't realize until a few years later, right? So I think that's completely natural.
mm,
But then again, there is of course something like the so-called speeds paper, which was the place where we introduced this idea of pre-processing, that if you have this so-called trust only yourself model, like
mm,
I trust myself, I follow the protocol, but maybe nobody else does. Can we still
mm,
have security? And we can, but it gets much harder. You have to use public key cryptography tools, and it gets really slow. But what you can do is you can do this pre-processing where you do all the heavy stuff, all the heavy lifting in the pre-processing phase, at night when we have good time, let's say. And then once we're there, the inputs are there, we can actually go fast. That was kind of the so-called speeds paper was I guess the first introduction of this idea, and that picked up quite fast, in fact. And I think that was probably because we were at a time where NPC was starting to take off in practice. So this idea that you can actually, in fact, really improve your speed there, I think was sort of almost immediately taken up. So
yeah,
it also depends on being at the right place at the right time, I guess.
yeah. I suppose when it comes, you've patented quite a few of your methods, and obviously that gives you good protection for that if you have a spin out and so on. But patenting has caused a lot of problems in the industry. The RSA paper, Diffie-Hellman, the Snore paper, all of those things. So, what's your opinions on patenting in cryptography? Is it a good thing or not?
I really don't think patenting helps
Mm,
development
yeah.
or in IT in general.
Mm,
Um, it's basically, I mean, it makes sense, I think, in other areas like medicine, maybe. But in IT, I don't think it makes sense at all. At least not if you look at the substance of the matter. Uh, like what we talked about before, that the snort patent probably, and in fact, hindered
yeah.
development of usage of Snor's idea. Um, and so I think it's really not if you have a good idea that you think has potential in practice, you should go be fast, get it implemented, get it used out there, and harvest the returns from that, and instead of patenting it, because it's just going to be it's going to make other people think they won't use your thing. Um,
Mm,
I know some companies, of course, have patents, in order to be able to, if you get into a fight, you can, you have ammunition against the other guys, maybe, but that's a different kind of problem, I guess.
yeah, that's right. And so, what do you think the next decade looks like in cryptography? What are the key problems that we need to solve?
So, yeah, um, eh, there are many, of course. I think one obvious thing is in post-quantum cryptography, which I think, of course, yeah, again, we don't know whether we will have to use post-quantum cryptography ever, but I think it's a very relevant research field, nevertheless. And and there are many things that we know how to do in post-quantum cryptography, but much slower than with the pre-quantum method. So matching that efficiency that we have in existing solutions is a big open problem. Um, And then, of course, there's the open problem with the number of rounds in MPC that I mentioned before. That would be fantastic to solve. Um, yeah, and yeah, there are several others. If we keep talking, I'll probably remember more of them.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. So, if you could change one thing in your career, what would it have been?
But here's one thing, right? That's a good question. Um, I I'm not sure it would change very much. It's been a fantastic career that I've had. Uh, I think basically, as I said before, um, I think very few people who are successful with something plan very much.
Mm.
Uh, I think most of us are just in the right place at the right time. Um, so I think it's mostly a matter of grabbing the chance when it's there. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, um, I don't know. I think so. When I was a PhD student and a very young researcher, I also had family already at the time. So I think if I hadn't had family, I could probably have done more in terms of traveling and going to the States and visiting people and doing work there. But that was not an option really. And I can't say I regret not having done that because I mean it's been going well anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And what is it about the Danish culture that makes the nation so successful? It's a small nation, but it punches so high above its weight. It's a happy country. It still focuses on science and maths and technology. What is it about the Danish culture that allows that to thrive?
It's hard to say exactly. What we talk about a lot is we have, to a large extent, a society based on trust. Like if you ask people, do you generally trust the person you meet on the street? Many more people will say yes than if you ask somebody from Central Europe, let's say. Um, and you know we have in summer when we have fresh strawberries, people will make little shops on the roadside where people just take stuff and you're supposed to leave money to pay. Um, and other people from foreign countries when they see this, they say, "What? That cannot possibly work." And we said, "What's the problem? Of course it works." So I think that's a basis of things working more smoothly
Mm.
than they maybe do in other countries.
Mm.
Like for instance, there's also, even though we have our share of bureaucracy, we have less than many other places, I think, and that's also a reason why, if you look at studies that talk about how easy it is to start a company, how easy it is to run it, a lot of countries come out on top there. I think that's probably also a reason why and why the IT business? Well, I think because we don't have, raw materials in the ground, natural resources, anything at all, in fact. Um, so we have to rely on, education and having good ideas.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think generally the Nordic countries have more trust. Citizens have more trust in the government than, as you say, in Central Europe. So they will see privacy and things like that as more important than spying on citizens generally.
Yeah, so there's a lot of debate on this, of course. There's a lot of privacy debate, and
Yeah.
you know, it's not that we don't have the same fights against, um, sometimes the police wanting to learn more stuff than they should really. But I think it's true to say that there is certainly trust in the general, let's say, public sector and people working there. It's not that we're not happy about politicians. I mean, there's all the kind of stuff of those kinds of discussions that you have everywhere. But I
Mm.
think if you talk about, the ordinary person that you meet in the government sector, um, I think nobody believes that they're out there to cheat you. I mean, they're basically they're just trying to do their job. Is
Mm.
the comprehension.
Yeah. And do you still teach at the university?
I do, yes.
Yeah. What subjects do you teach?
So I teach at this time I teach the introductory cryptography course. So our master students, the first cryptography course they get is the one I teach.
Yeah, that's good. And what's your favorite topic in that?
Um, Well, what's the favorite topic? So I think I guess there are two. So one is to sort of get people to understand the math behind things like RSA, um, and the group theory that's behind this and stuff like this, where they sort of finally get to see that the math they have been trying to learn is actually useful for something, and that's quite an eye opener for many people. Um, and then, of course, this whole idea of teaching people what does it mean that something is secure? How do we define these things? All these oracle games that we play, um, understanding what is a reduction. Yeah. So that's also something that they start from scratch there completely. So bringing up to speed on that is an interesting experience.
Yeah, excellent. And if you were a new researcher now, what problem do you think you would be addressing?
Um, yeah. So what? Yeah. Okay. Um, well, I guess. Um, so one thing is, of course, which reminds me, by the way, of the open problems we talked about before. It, the thing I couldn't remember before,
Yeah.
that there's this silent pre-processing thing we talked about. There's been a big development in this with two-party protocols.
Mm.
As soon as we talk multi-party, there seems to be, a big gap there. That all the techniques that are so nice and shiny and work so well for two parties don't really work well for several parties. And that's something that I don't see why we shouldn't be able to crack that somehow. Um, Not that I know how, of course, but I mean that would be an interesting thing to try and do.
Yeah. And there's obviously been some inspirational people in cryptography, Whitfield Diffie, Marty Hellman, Reves, Shamir, Edelman, and so on, David Chaum. Who were the people that you looked up to when you were growing your research profile?
Yeah, so of course, I would say that if anyone deserves the title of being the greatest cryptographer out there, I would say Shamir for sure.
Shamir, yeah,
He's also done everything, you know.
amazing.
Uh, that's just amazing. That's really one of my idols. But then, of course, there's also contemporary people that I think have done fantastic things, like Yuval Shai, for instance, who is not only a walking encyclopedia, but also a guy who spits out interesting ideas continuously. I don't know how he does that, but it just keeps coming. That's also very impressive.
Yeah, I agree with Audie Shamir. Shamir shares RSA method
Mm,
and obviously the non-interactive proofs
mm,
that convert
mm,
Snor's uh, a challenge into being non-interactive was just genius
mm.
overall. Great. Well, thanks very much for answering the questions. And hopefully we will see you sometime in the UK or in Scotland. And if you're ever in Edinburgh, we'd love to have you here as a guest speaker.
Thank you.
So,
It's been a
so
pleasure. Yeah,
thank you so much. And hopefully we'll speak soon. Thank you.
thank you. Yeah.